Hello and welcome back to the Conductors podcast with me, Fabian, Harry,
Hello.
Ali,
Hello.
and Louise.
Hi.
Today, Louise is going to be telling us about some very disturbing railway murders.
I'm going to tell you about Thomas Briggs. He was the first victim to be murdered on the railways, and he created a bit of an uproar among society. And so I suppose I'll tell you about that. So first of all, he was a middle-class banker from the outskirts of London. He was found on the 10th of July, 1864, on the line just up from Hackney, where he lived, on the North Line between Hackney and Fenchurch Street. He was found with his head caved in, and he was still alive at the time, but died shortly after of his injuries. Later on that day, at Fenchurch Street, a carriage was found full of blood and with a walking stick and a beaver hat in it. So obviously they flagged up that something was wrong and this chap had died. And they set a detective, what was his name? Inspector Richard Tanner, in the new founded detective branch in the Metropolitan Police. It'd only been running for 20 years, and so they set him to work trying to find the murderer. With the lack of fingerprints and forensics, it was very difficult to do, so the only sort of lead that they had was this beaver hat was not Thomas Briggs. He was a 69-year-old middle-class banker, so he would have had a top hat, quite a tall, sort of the typical Victorian hat you can imagine. And what was found was a beaver hat, which came over from Canada during the fur trade, and they sort of look a little bit jaunty, a bit more casual, and therefore it was flagged up as not to be Thomas Briggs. Eventually, it was quite an unusual start. It was tracked down to the hat maker, and it was said to be Franz Müller, the man who was convicted and accused of the murder of Thomas Briggs and later hanged for it in Newgate Prison in London. He was chased by the police all the way to New York until he was arrested in Manhattan. There was very little evidence in the trial, but he was still found guilty and hanged on the 14th of November, 1864. It's quite an interesting case because a gold watch was stolen, along with other valuables such as some gold-rimmed spectacles, and it was sort of seen as a robbery, and this sort of created uproar among society because with how new and exciting these railways were, they were rumoured to be quite dangerous. It sort of represented the anxiety and the apprehension towards the new railways. The first class and lower class carriages were supposed to be separate, so you couldn't get to, each other. The upper class people weren't bothered by the sort of lower class scum, I suppose. And this really showed that wasn't true. This chap was quite happily commuting to his job at work and then beaten and thrown off a train for his valuables, which really scared people. The murder was unusual in society, to be honest, and it just associated danger with the railways, and that wasn't doing any good for the companies that run them. It sort of gives us a look at the Victorian society and how they felt about the railways, because you get a lot of positive press from it, and actually I think it's difficult to say that what the sort of common people felt about it, but it seems to be that there was a lot of apprehension, and it was quite a scary thing, and it wasn't always positive as it's advertised to be, this sort of revolution of railways. It got a lot of press coverage, this murder. It advertised the danger of railways, and they were it was spread across all newspapers and media, and this had grown rapidly in the last few years because of the railways in general. They were able to transport newspaper and more media quicker and to far more places. So people were finding out about this and just not really happy about it. It was quite scary at the time, I suppose.
I wonder how much of this negative press was kind of associated with or caused by a railway mania, which was a. Have you heard of railway mania?
Yeah.
It's this the idea that the railways could just drive people mad, and if there are supposedly normal men on the railways, they'll just go insane and start attacking people and such. I wonder if this is.
I would say definitely, and that all comes from just being, this being new and unusual, and them not knowing much about it. If it's scary and it's new and it's quite unknown, people often push it away as, oh, it might make you mad. Oh, let's not touch that. I'll give you negative sort of. They're much less embracing than I think we are today, maybe.
Yeah, it's really scary to see a corpse in a train. Such a scary thought, really. And I just imagine yourself you're just a local chap, and you go to the train station to go somewhere, and you're like, oh look, there's my train. I'm gonna get on board it. And then you see a corpse just sitting there or lying on the floor, and you're like, oh look, a dead body. I'm gonna get off board.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't. He wasn't actually found on the train. He was found on the tracks. But I see what you mean. But it would have been very much hidden from public view.
Yeah.
Even scarier is to think of how the body would have looked after it had been thrown out of the train. I mean, you described it as you described him as having his head caved in.
This poor chap was 69 years old, and he had a wife and kids. He was just doing his job.
Obviously, there's other murders on the railways. I think I don't know if it was a true story or not, but the murder on the Orient Express.
Oh yeah, that's a novel.
Yeah.
The Murder on the Orient Express. It's sort of this now quite modern, almost just fictional idea of people being murdered on trains, but it happened quite a lot because it's become an ideal that's quite not popular, but used quite a lot, because I should imagine the idea of sort of a locked, well, not really locked, but when you're on a train, you're on a train. You can't get off. So it's that sort of locked door mystery that people love, and
it adds to the horror of it. I mean, there are, the idea of being kind of locked on this train with the murderer. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of films that you can watch that kind of go down this similar theme. Not just on trains, but also kind of it works for planes as well and other forms of transport like boats and such. The idea definitely plays on kind of the I don't know, the mind. It just plays on that.
Yeah, and you can imagine that being something that's brand new, and this transport was so revolutionary, and And nothing had ever been seen like it before. You know, they didn't have cars or planes. It was just horse and carriage. And the idea of that is just insane anyway. And then you add this sort of element of mystery and murder and sort of just scary things, really, apprehension. You can imagine how people would be avoiding the railways. You know, I'd avoid that. And, you know, sort of popular culture makes you think, oh, everyone loved the railways. It was such a positive thing. You know, it just made such difference to everyone's lives. Actually, it was really avoided for many, many years. The detective branch in the Metropolitan Police was only formed in the 1840s. So, like, 20 years before this murder happened. And, like, these detectives had, like, nothing to go on, no forensics, no fingerprints, nothing like that. They purely had a few photographs of the crime scene and anything that was at the crime scene. Other than that, you know, they had to interview family members, friends, and just purely go off hearsay, which, you know, when the punishment for murder is so severe, you know, at the time you were hanged for it, and that was it. There was no, you know, life in prison, none of that. You were just hanged for it. It's quite interesting that I should imagine there was at least 50% of people, you know, convicted of murder actually were probably innocent. And that's quite a scary thought in itself.
I think
Why?
I heard
Sorry, go ahead.
I heard somewhere that like judges at the time knew this, but the whole rationale was, well, look, you know, if we kill a few innocent people, it's fine, so long as we kill some, you know, actually guilty ones as well.
Yeah, it's like this whole thing of, oh, it looks better for us if they're all guilty, so it's fine. You know, oh, we look like we're catching killers. Well, actually, they're just they're probably hanging some innocent people.
Do you think the person they hanged for this crime? Do you think he was guilty?
I do personally. I think the fact that he ran all the way to New York.
Yeah.
So he was chased onto a ship and then chased all the way back, all the way to Manhattan and then back. It makes him look pretty guilty. There was no other sort of suspects of any note. It was pretty much this chap. And I don't see why there's any reason why he shouldn't have been guilty, to be honest.
He must have been really tired after that very, very long run. Like 3,000 miles. Like that's quite a long run. Like
Gosh. Wow. That was very, very dark and very grisly. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Conductors podcast, and we will see you next time.